With your goals in place, it's time to move on to your budget. You must make sure that your club has the financial resources necessary for your event to be successful. Even more than that, you need to ensure that your event is a good investment for your club. In this training, we will go over how you can build out your event budget and the types of expenses you should consider as you plan. We will also talk about the importance of event cancellation insurance. Don't forget, for complete guidance on this subject, refer to the Sertoma Club Event Planning Guide. As I just mentioned, it's important to make sure that any event you hold is a good investment for your club. This centers upon the event's return on investment, or ROI. ROI is calculated by taking the value and dividing it by cost. Most experts consider a 5-to-1 ratio as a good ROI. That's the bar you want to strive for. Anything at 10-to-1 is considered exceptional. Tight fundraising budgets mean that organizations and boards need to properly allocate and carefully spend each dollar. After all, every dollar spent on your event is an investment for your club. That money is spent in hopes of reaching favorable business outcomes according to event planning site The Bizzabo blog. This includes things like increased membership, more community sponsorships, and higher event profits. Most club event budgets are going to follow a very traditional model. The budget should account for 4 main columns minimally. This includes the budget item, projected expense, actual expense, and details and notes. With this one, you'll want to include all relevant information to help justify budget decisions and document event history. There are a few other things to keep in mind as you set your budget. The first and perhaps most important one is a comprehensive review of any required budget goals. Remember, the purpose of the budget isn't just about allocating how money is spent. It's also about prioritizing any spending toward the most valuable event elements. Next, you will want to look at your event's history, if there is one. Taking advantage of things like past data and historical documents can really help you save time and make sound decisions during the budgeting phase. It's equally important to work with any event stakeholders that have financial oversight. This can include groups like club leaders, volunteer members, or vendors. Everyone involved needs to be on the same page. Otherwise, you may find your club in a situation where details are overlooked or miscommunicated to the point where it becomes a significant financial hardship. A significant portion of the budgeting process focuses on examining your event expenses. This starts with the projected expenses. These are the upfront projections you share with your leadership and planning team to prevent surprises. Actual expenses come later and are totaled after the event. These expenditures tell the true story of what your club is looking at in terms of profit. So with all that in mind, let's look at some of the most common event expense categories. Venue. This is likely going to be the biggest line item on your budget. It's important to communicate any event requirements and support needs as you choose your on-site location or virtual event hosting platform. We recommend considering several options as it not only gives you the best idea of what's out there, may also give you a little bit of bargaining power. Rental costs. This is another component that can have significant implications for both on-site and virtual events. For those events that are held in person, rental costs will account for everything from event meeting space and fees to housekeeping and package handling. Major virtual events may also have rental costs you will need to include, such as studio space or recording equipment. Catering. This on-site expense includes all food and beverage charges, taxes, tips, and service fees. Staffing. Most club events won't really have too many staffing costs because they are usually run by volunteers. However, if you require any kind of hired help, think about things like security or registration assistance. This is the area to include those costs. You would also likely want to include any meals, travel, or hotel accommodations that you'll cover for your volunteers. Event decor. This budget category is mostly limited to in-person events and would include things like flowers, tinting, and other event decorations. And transportation. While this line item can seem pretty self-explanatory in the way of air travel, rental cars, or shuttle buses, it also encompasses gas, tolls, parking fees, and travel insurance. Next up is entertainment and speakers. Every event deserves a little flair. Regardless if the event is held in person or online, there are 2 major items to remember: speaking fees and AV costs. If you incur either, account for them here. Depending on the type of event, you may also have to pay for live entertainment or music licensing fees. Technology. This one is likely most significant with virtual events. This would include things like your registration platform, which is also important for on-site events, internet fees, and any related integration costs. Marketing. Any costs associated with branding, advertising, or publicizing the event falls into this category. This includes printing charges, direct mail costs, paid print advertisements, photography fees, signage, paid search ads, and social media ad campaigns. Next up is gifts. You know that swag that every event has? This is where those promotional items will go. If your virtual event sends gift bags to attendees' homes, does a virtual gift bag, or even gives an e-gift card for registering, make sure to account for it here. Other activities. Many longer in-person events may include special tours, sporting events, leisure activities, or other arrangements to allow for attendees to socialize and network in a more relaxed setting. Depending on the type of activity, you may need to include a separate breakdown of costs to give the full financial overview. Of course, there are going to be those expenditures that don't fit into any of the aforementioned categories. In those situations, it's helpful to build a miscellaneous section into your budget. You will also want to include an emergency fund within your budget to give the event a little financial cushion should anything go awry. A final note on expenses. Keep in mind what costs are one-time and which ones are recurring. Recurring costs would be things like ongoing rental fees, subscription charges, or software licensing fees. It can also be a significant purchase, such as expensive camera equipment that will be used across many events. In these instances, your club will need to decide how it will space out the purchase and divide the expenses properly over multiple event budgets, if so chosen. Event cancellation insurance is one final piece to consider as you plan your budget. There are 3 major questions to consider here. First, are you facing one of the maxims of risk management? The American Society of Association Executives identifies 2 major risk factors: high severity loss that threatens the organization's financial viability, and protection against low frequency, high severity events. This is important because event revenue is often the biggest source of income for many nonprofits, making it an asset definitely worth protecting. Next, what factors go into our purchasing decision? ASAE encourages organizations to consider what portion of their revenue comes from the event, if the organization can absorb the lost revenue from a cancellation, if the event is vulnerable to outside factors like weather or disease, all non-refundable or prepaid financial commitments, and the organization's overall risk tolerance. Finally, does Sertoma's insurance program cover it? Events cancellation insurance is not currently covered by Sertoma's insurance program. Though an additional expense for the club, the insurance may still be necessary to avoid significant risk if you're hosting a major event. A few other things to keep in mind from ASAE. Events and meetings are non-tangible property that you want to protect, just as you would any other physical and intellectual properties. Understand what is excluded in your policy. Typical exclusions may include things like financial failure, loss of financial support from other entities, and other elective necessities such as inconvenience or conflict with local ordinances. Comparison shop. Cost may not be as high as you think. Your force majeure clause does not usually account for your total net income, which can be critical when it comes time to refund registrations and sponsorships. And finally, know what self-insuring really means. ASAE says many organizations use this term incorrectly, instead relying on retained risk. Make sure that any decisions here fall within the intended and/or mandated scope of revenue use. And that wraps up today's session on event budgeting. You can find additional resources on this topic and others in our Members Center at members.sertoma.org. Still have questions? Make sure to connect with staff, national leadership, and other Sertomans in our members-only Facebook group using the link on the screen.